Should have done that earlier, but now I'm actually recording the screen. So one thing I will try to do as well is after each little like section of stuff, I will ask people if they have any questions, because I don't want to like slow down and like, oh, like ask a question at any time kind of thing. Like, let's go through all the information. But I also don't want to be like, hey, here's 30 minutes of information. Now, do you have any questions? So I'll try and break it up a little bit like that. So definitely, if you have questions, please ask them. Like, especially if there's a very specific question that you have, that's what this is for. This is for answering specific questions. Even if it seems like a dumb question, trust me, there's a lot of things that are really tricky that you may not get. Like the other day, we were doing we were doing a learning party, and I'm gonna throw Furry under the bus real quick because it was so funny to me. I didn't know that he had learned tank swapping on a very specific fight. So I told him, all right, this is where we do the tank swap, and he tank swapped and proceeded to cleave the entire party. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. So little things like that are like, you don't know until you know. Until you know, you don't know. It's kind of the basics. So. But you know what? We have enough people to do stuff here, so we'll just kind of start from the beginning. If people join, they join. Who cares? So, first things first, I need to pull up my little notes that I had here. Because believe it or not, I actually did write down some stuff to remember. So I didn't forget anything. Okay, cool. So we'll start from the very, very beginning right now. Tanking. The job of a tank, according to Final Fantasy, is they are high in HP, trained in defense. A tank serves as the party's shield, skilled at keeping a foe's attention and bearing the brunt of enemy attacks. Yeah, that's all pretty, nice and pretty letters. Basically, that highlights two things that tanks are absolutely mandatory for in all content. Aggro, which is short for aggression, like pulling aggression from enemies to make sure they don't hit other people. And they have the highest HP and defenses, meaning they can eat the most damage. Those two things seem pretty self-explanatory, but they are very important for how you approach late game content, because HP is a resource, and we'll get into a little bit more of that with Keek earlier or later, because healers, at least at a high level, they'll view HP as a resource. Like, you don't have to stay at 100% HP. There is a little bit of responsibility for the tank to keep themselves alive, stuff like that. So, what does that mean exactly? That means you're the one that dictates how fights happen. What I mean by that is you tell everybody where the enemy's going to be standing with your actions. If you group up all the enemies in a giant stack here, we're going to fight here. They can't go fight somewhere else because the enemies won't be there. So that means you have a lot of control over the flow of combat. The other thing that means is because you have the most HP and you're very tanky by nature, you actually are able to support other people a lot more than other roles. DPS, they don't get a lot of mistakes. If they get hit by a mechanic, chances are they're going to die to something else. Tanks, you get a little bit of freedom, and we'll come back to that in a little bit here. But in broad strokes, that's the job of a tank, is to support the party and to draw aggression from every enemy in the game. So, quickly, job actions. Every job has a lot of these individual roles. Role abilities. They are going to be shared for all of that class. So all 4 tanks share these abilities, so they're the same for everybody. And then you have specific actions which are unique to each class, or job, I'm sorry. But each job, they have different names. We'll get into that in a second. But I wanted to cover these very basic ones real quick so you know exactly what they are. You have mitigation abilities. Mitigation means you are mitigating the damage that is being taken both by yourself and by the party. All classes have some form of this. It's called reprisal. It gives you a 10% damage debuff to all enemies that are in your area when you use it. It's an AoE. This is very important because that is how you protect your teammates from damage. It helps you, but it really is for helping your teammates. You have a self mitigation called Rampart that just gives you a straight damage or damage reduction. You take less damage for 20 seconds. Really, really powerful. And then from there, you have a couple other options that you really don't use as much, but they are very important. One is low blow. One is interject. Those are used to control certain things that enemies do. Not really relevant in higher level dungeons, but in low level dungeons, very important. Any ability that has a red cast bar, which I'll try and show you at some point. If it has a red cast bar, you can use this attack. I call it the shut up button because it's telling them to shut up. Like, this is what that's for. Low blow stuns an enemy. Very similar. If an enemy doesn't resist stun, you can kick them, stuns them. Really, really helpful ability. Paladin actually has that in their kit as an attack, but we'll talk about that later. And then the last two that I wanted to talk about are Arm's Length and Provoke. Oh, and Shirk. They go together, Provoke and Shirk. Arm's Length is the most underrated tank ability. What it really does is it prevents knockback effects, so there's a lot of mechanics where you can prevent knockback. But what it does in dungeons is it provides a slow to every enemy that hits you for 6 seconds. So if you pull a massive mob and you hit them all with this, you're going to take 20% less damage for 15 seconds. That is equal to Rampart. So we'll talk about that in a second here, but when you do mitigation in large parties, you have a lot of options at your disposal and they work together. Provoke and Shirk, these not as important, but it is important later. Provoke is how you draw aggro from an enemy, putting yourself at the top of the list, regardless of what you were doing before that moment. It's very, very useful for tanks when they have to swap aggro from a boss. That's much more further down the road, but just in general, something to look forward to. This is also important because if you die in a dungeon or in a fight and you get revived, you want to provoke as quickly as possible because chances are that boss is now beating somebody else's butt up. So that's a very cool ability to have in general, Provoke. So those are role actions. Those are the same for every single tank. They function all the exact same for every tank. You then have a couple specific actions, and I'm going to mostly talk about Warrior right here, but I'm going to explain the differences between all of the jobs. So there's what's called a heavy mitigation. Heavy mitigation means it is your heaviest damage mitigation. It reduces the most amount of damage and keeps you alive the longest. That one is typically your first mitigation that you'll use on any mechanic that requires you to take less damage. Tank busters. If you're pulling a massive mob, you pop that first and that'll keep you alive. All four of them have a heavy mitigation, all four of the tank classes, but they do function differently. To briefly talk about it, Warrior, theirs provides a regen after getting hit, which is nice. It just gives you a regen, as well as reducing damage by 40%. They all do the 40%. Sorry, let me clarify that. It also hurts enemies that attack it. So Warrior does more damage to mobs with their mitigation. Paladin has a very similar thing, but theirs is the 40%, and it gives them a barrier equal to 1,000 potency shield, which is basically just a massive shield. That's the best way to think of that. So same thing as Warrior, 40%, except Paladin gets a shield. Gunbreaker, same concept. It does 40% mitigation, but it raises your HP by 20%, which is pretty cool. Like, that's a pretty sizable health buff. And then Dark Knight, I don't have that one at max, but it does 40% as well, and it actually functions a little bit differently. If you fall below 50% while using that ability, or if an attack takes you below 50%, you get a heal equivalent to 1200 potency, I believe. So it heals you as well. The moral of all this is your heavy mitigation is how you protect yourself from dying. I specify heavy because you have other options. That is your first option in 90% of content. From there, what I would recommend is, let's say you're pulling a whole group of enemies and you're about to fight them. You just pop this, and this lasts for 15 seconds roughly. If you didn't know, you're top of the screen, or you can customize it however you want, but you have a number next to your buffs. You're going to take less damage for that whole time. What that means is for 15 seconds, you fight without really thinking about your health. You're going to fight for 15 seconds and do a shit ton of damage. When you're about to run out and you're still fighting enemies, if that debuff or if that buff drops, you're going to take a lot more damage. So what you do is, when that buff is about to wear off, you pop your next mitigations. I don't know if there's an appropriate term for this, but I just call it your other mitigations. But I would then pop Rampart and Arm's Length. And then now, for another 15 seconds, I take less damage and everything around me gets slowed for 20 seconds. 20 plus 20 is roughly 40. So it works the same way as this one button did right here. You take less damage for almost 30 seconds. 30 seconds of mitigation. If it takes you more than 30 seconds to kill a mob, there's probably some other problems you're going to have down the road, so don't worry about that right now. Just focus on keeping yourself alive for 30 seconds. From there, you have other options, but that's kind of the basics on mitigation as a role. All of the jobs have something very similar to that. On that note, does anybody have any questions about job actions or mitigations in general? Because there's one other thing I haven't talked about mitigations, but just, is there anything that comes to mind right now? No? Okay. All right, cool. So that's all very basic stuff, but that's the basics of tanking, so it's important. From there, each tank class will have some sort of self-heal or self-mitigation ability. I kind of think of it as like an instant mitigation. The best way to explain it is if you're about to take an incoming attack or if something's going to hit you really hard, that's the button you pop for that instant thing because it's on a lower cooldown than all of your other abilities. For Warrior, it's Bloodwetting. For Paladin, it is Holy Sheltron and some other abilities. For Gunbreaker, it's Heart of Corundum. And for Dark Knight, it is Blackest Night. Those are all really important tools for the tank to use. The only reason I really mention them right now, though, is because you've got to familiarize yourself with what they do, because that's the reason tanks are unkillable. All this other stuff is cool. You're not going to take a lot of damage, but you are going to have a healer help you. For Warrior specifically, when I pop this Bloodwetting ability, I am basically immortal for 12 seconds. Or for 8 seconds. It's a big deal. Like, it's a very, very big deal to learn those abilities. That comes later, though. Don't worry about that before like level 70. That's something you'll get into as you get a little bit higher up the list. And we'll go over that again here in a moment when I talk about dungeons themselves in a more practical sense. The last little bit of information to just throw at you right now is invulnerabilities. So this is extremely important for dungeons, especially if you're playing with people you don't know. As Kik just demonstrated, you can lower your HP to 1 when you pop Super Blind. So every tank has an invulnerability skill. They all function a little differently, though. Warriors, it prevents them from falling below 1 HP. So that doesn't mean you're going to take no damage. That means that you're not going to die. That's an important distinction because Paladin, when you use Paladin's invulnerability skill, they take no damage. Big difference. When Gunbreaker does what Keek just did and lowered his HP down to 1, that's exactly what Super Belide does. It reduces your HP to 1, no matter what your HP was, and it makes you immune to most attacks. So if a healer's there with you, the healer can heal you safely. You're not going to die during that ability. And then Dark Knight is a little bit different. Theirs is called Living Dead. It's a lot more generous in a way. Basically, you use this ability, and for 10 seconds, if you die, you don't die. You become Living Dead. And then you have another 10-second window to fully restore your HP to max. If you get your HP back to max, then you're good to go. If you fail to reach max, then you die for real 10 seconds later. Both are very, very good. This is really good in dungeons, especially because even if you don't ever get fully healed, you're going to last 10 seconds longer, and that's the difference between a party wiping and not for dungeons. So yeah, invulnerabilities are very important. Familiarize yourself with it. Each one functions a little differently, but the bottom line is that is your button to save yourself from dying. If you are running a dungeon and you feel like you're about to die, do not be scared to use your invulnerability. It's better for you to live and look silly to your healer than to die and look silly to everybody. That's my personal advice for that. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of what tank actions are. Rotations we're going to talk a little bit more about later, but those are the functions of a tank, how you stay alive as a tank. So before we get into a little bit more specific stuff, does anybody have any questions on what mitigations are, what invulnerabilities are, any specific questions? Please feel free to ask. Okay. Silence. All right, cool. So then that's the very, very, very basics of what the characters do. Now for more practical stuff, this is where we get into how to functionally tank. First things first, this is more for all classes, not just tanks, but rotations. When people talk about rotations, they mean what are your skill rotations, the order that you use your skills to do damage and to build your gauges, to do all that cool stuff. The reason I bring that up for this is because every role is responsible for damage. Even though you're a tank, your damage is not as high as a DPS, you're responsible for damage because all content is balanced around parties having damage from all 8 characters or 4 characters, whatever you're doing. So it's important to not die, but it's equally important to do that while doing damage. So I say rotations because that's something you should familiarize yourself with any class. For this example, I'm showing you Warrior, but every class has their own little pattern to it. For Warrior, it's very simple. You do 1, you do 2, and then you have a little bit of options here, but this is an attack that gives you a 10% damage buff for 30 seconds. By pushing that, I now have 10% more damage, and I am able to use all of my skills and do more damage than I would if I didn't do that. The reason I bring that up is because if this gauge is not here, even if I'm not dying or I'm helping the team out, I'm really not doing a good job as a tank, because my job is to kill things while staying alive. That's the overall job. Don't think of tank as useless damage-wise. Don't think of healers as useless damage-wise. Both of the jobs are extremely important for damage. You're just not going to do as much as DPS. From that point, you're going to have to practice your rotation, which you'll get from playing the game. You'll get from doing dungeons, or you can hit dummies like we're doing right now. And eventually you want to reach a point where you're able to do your rotation while watching other people. So in this case, I could be doing my attacks, like doing this, doing this, doing this. And let's say in the middle of a dungeon, Keek gets hit by something and now he's sitting here with no HP at all. Because I know my rotation and I know what I'm doing and I'm able to push all my buttons and look cool while I'm doing it, I can also click on him and take care of him with all of my different abilities and stuff like that. That's what I mean by you're supporting your teammates. You're not just there to do damage. You're not just there to take hits. You're not just there to heal. You're there to do all of it. So it's very important that you familiarize yourself with what your skills are and the order you use them and all that good stuff. That I can go over a lot more detailed. In fact, I will here at the end of all this, specifically for Warrior, just so you guys can see what a rotation looks like when you're doing all the buttons. But we're also going to try and cover job-specific stuff down the road, so watch out for that. The other part of this is more of a general thing. It's not unique to the tank role. It's actually just a big thing for Final Fantasy in general, but I want to make sure everybody knows about it. There are what are called global cooldown abilities, GCD abilities. These ones all kind of share the same recast timer. So like if you look at Heavy Swing right here, it says it is an instant cast and the recast is 2.46 seconds. That means when I push this button, I cannot do another action that's considered a GCD action for 2.5 seconds. I can click it, I can click it, I can click it. Nothing will happen until 2 seconds elapses. The reason that's important is because in between those GCD abilities, global cooldown abilities, there are things called off global cooldown abilities, or oGCD. This is a lot of technical words that people will use online all the time, but basically it says if I push this and I can't push that button until that happens, that's downtime. That's time I could be doing other stuff. So instead, you push this, then 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 you push this. You're making the most of the gaps in between your attacks. That's something called weaving. You're weaving attacks into your big attacks. That's something that every class does in some way, shape, or form. Ideally, you'll do what's called double weaving, which is you use 2 of those abilities that I mentioned, 2 of those oGCD abilities before your next regular ability. So I do 1, that, and then I can do 2. So I got 4 actions in the amount of time it took me to do 2 actions. That is a very important concept for damage in general because, it's literally nearly doubling your abilities. Very, very important concept, but it's not something you'll get right away. It's something you got to familiarize yourself with. I recommend highly looking at what your abilities do and figuring out what gaps you have in your rotation, because that'll make you tremendously stronger. Like, Keek's over there pushing a shit ton of buttons right now. Same concept. Like, you could just hit one button every 2.5 seconds, or you could push a lot of buttons and do a lot of damage really fast. So those are called GCD abilities and oGCD abilities. When you weave them together, that's called weaving. If you do 2 oGCD abilities between GCD abilities, that's called double weaving, or however you want to go from there. Those are technical terms, but it'll help you tremendously if you start thinking that way, because instead of pushing one button every 2 seconds, you're going to be doing a lot more damage. That's kind of specific. Does anybody have any questions on GCD, oGCD, or weaving? Any questions at all?
It's very worth mentioning you probably never want to triple weave.
Yes. Sorry, I should say that too. That's a good point. So triple weave, meaning using 3 abilities between. So if you watch my skills right here, if I do 1 and then I do 2, if you click and click and click and click, it won't do the action until it actually comes available. If I do this and then I do 1, 2, 3, and then go here, I wasted time. I used too many actions in between my window, so I didn't push this button at the proper time in my rotation. That's an important thing, like Kika's mentioning. You don't want to do too many of those other actions because then you're wasting time. Ideally, you'll do, for starting out, focus on one at a time. Do your action, your GCD, do an oGCD. Do a GCD, do an oGCD. That'll get you in the flow of pushing buttons a lot faster. And then from there, you do want to get to a double weave point where you do 1 action, 2 oGCDs, 1 action, 2 oGCDs. That'll just make you tremendously faster in general. Don't do 3 though. An example of that, we were just talking about this the other day. Keek saw somebody in a dungeon who was playing Astrologian, and they drew their deck and they proceeded to place all 3 cards, and they proceeded to draw more cards and place 3 more cards, all before doing a second attack. That's not good. That's a lot of downtime. You're not doing damage. You're not doing anything really for that time. So in general, not a good idea. So don't triple weave, double weave. All right, so that's just a general thing for all classes, but really important for tanks too. I guess from here, the next thing to mention is how to pull in dungeons. This is going to be a little more specific to your own personal play style, but what I would recommend is, sorry, I'm going to go into an unsynced thing real quick, and I'll show you just a random dungeon. Let's not go too deep so we don't do a spoiler. Let's just do whatever. Wander's Boundless. Nah, keep it real. Doesn't matter. I'm going to be backing out of this in a minute. Doesn't really matter. So when you're in a dungeon as a tank, you kind of control the speed of the dungeon. You can go as slow as you need to. You can go as long, like as fast as you want to. But ultimately, you're responsible for your own health. So if you're going to over pull a dungeon, be very careful. Like, know your limits. And if you're scared, go a little bit slower until you get that confidence. With a few exceptions, there's really no dungeon in this game you can't pull every single enemy and live, like, to go to the end. That's called wall-to-wall pulling. Wall-to-wall means I started here on one wall, and I'm going to run until I hit a wall that I can't go forward anymore, and we have to kill every enemy in front of me. That's called wall-to-wall pulling. You can do that on any tank with confidence. You can do it on any dungeon. There are some that are harder, but trust me, you can do it. You just kind of got to get the practice. So what I wanted to point out here for dungeons, though, is you queue up. Everybody's standing around, cool, saying hi to each other. You always want to make sure your tank stance is on. If you forget, it happens. Don't panic. Just remember to pop it. So from here, you want to keep running, and you want to pull enemies with you as you run. There's 2 ways to do that. One is your range attack. All tanks have a range attack. It'll pull a group to you, and then from there, you can use your AoE, and you keep running. I'm a little strong. They're dying in 1 hit right now, so this probably wasn't the best example. But by doing those 2 actions, you can hit all of those enemies and keep running. While you're doing that, the enemies will chase you. So if you do it like this, and you've now hit all 4 enemies. I killed them all in 1 shot, but whatever. The point is I hit all 4 of the enemies. That's how you kind of run through a dungeon at a high speed. We're going to go over this a little more detailed here with Keek and Sweaty as well, but I just want to show you the motion. That's what it looks like. You're throwing your range attack, you're using AoEs. You can do it however you really want to. I forgot the sunstone, so whatever. You can do it however you want to, but that's the general ebb and flow of a tank. Pull everything, bring it with you. We're going to take that to the extreme real quick by inviting, oh, Sweet's here, so Sweet's getting promoted to our battle party. We are going to do a really, really fun dungeon real quick. I'm going to take off unrestricted party. A really, really fun dungeon to learn how to tank in, like, at a higher level. If I can
Quote
remember
unquote fun.
No, it's fun. It's always fun. It's fun for
we
me.
go to Mount Gulg.
Yeah, we're going to Gulg. So, Mount Gulg. This is, I will preface real quick, this is part of Shadowbringer's story. It will have a little bit of Shadowbringer stuff in it, so please don't watch the next like 5 minutes if you're worried about the story like that. I'll try not to have any spoilers come up though. Wait, we can't have somebody join. Oh, sweet, you need to be on a class above 80, I believe.
That'll work.
All right. So the reason I'm using this dungeon specifically is because I'm going to be able to show you two things. One, I'm going to be able to show you how to run really quickly and pull a bunch of enemies with you, and I mean a bunch. This dungeon has a lot of enemies. Two, this is a great dungeon to show you how to use your mitigations and how to work with your healer. Specifically this time, Keek will be showing us some stuff. So when you get in the dungeon, first make sure your tank stance is on.
So it is you.
And then you're just going to basically run through here, hitting everything that you see. If you miss some enemies, it's okay to come back. Just make sure you tag them. On the left side of the screen, this is the aggro list. This is every enemy that's on the map right now. If it is a red name next to them, or if it's a red icon next to their name, that means you have aggro on that enemy. This is important because if you ever lose aggro, then you need to redraw the aggro. And that way you don't lose, like this right here, this one turned to orange because they're doing damage while we're running. So what I do is I click on the name and I just throw my tomahawk at them. However you want to feel like doing it, it's up to you. That's how I personally do it. Point is, just keep an eye on this aggro list. Make sure that you're the one getting hit. Now, if you've noticed, I have now brought... I brought a party with me. I got hit right there and I lost about half my health. This is going to be important right here because this is the stopping point. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop my self-healing, my mitigation, and I'm going to pop my 30% mitigation. I now cannot take damage for a brief amount of time. I'm watching the top of my screen. There's a lot of information up there, but I'm watching my health and watching everything like that. And now that it's wearing off, I'm going to part Rampart, and I'm going to pop Arm's Length. And look at this giant wave of people hitting me, and they cannot kill me. Kiki's keeping me alive too, so that's nice. I'm now going to pop Reprisal and my other mitigation options. And now is the scary part. We just got to pray that we don't die. I have Home Gang ready, though. I'm going to use it just to be safe. I don't need to, but I'm going to be safe right there. In fact, he kept me full health, so now. And then right here, my self-healing's back up. And we've done the pull. We pulled all of these enemies. We kept ourselves alive during the entire time. It looks like we lost aggro on this, so actually Sweet was being getting hit this whole time, and that's on me. But yeah. I used every skill at my disposal, was able to wipe that entire thing, and now we progress through the dungeon. That's what you can do as a tank. Like, you don't have to go slow. You can go as fast as you want to. Just make sure you're playing within your means. If you don't feel comfortable doing 20 enemies, take 10. You can take 10, slowly do it, build yourself up to it. Real quick, we're going to show you a couple new things on this one. Specifically, I'm going to show you what positionals are on this. So Sweaty is playing melee. Melee DPS, they require positionals at times. Positionals means they have attacks that are stronger when they hit the boss from a certain angle. From the rear or from the sides, those are the two places they need to be. So what happens is, as a tank, you want to keep the boss facing one direction. Typically speaking, you'll have it face the same direction the whole fight, but it really doesn't matter as long as you're not spinning the boss in a circle. I'll show you what that looks like in a second here, but by keeping the boss facing one way, Sweaty will know at all times where to go with his body to attack. So I'll talk about that as we're doing this real quick. Also, as a tank, this is just something else that's, in my opinion, important. You have a thing on the party called Countdown. If you go to your party tab, the very last option is called Countdown. I put it on my hotbar because it's just easier for me. You can go here and type any number between 5 and 30 seconds. So if I do 8 seconds and hit start, this tells everybody that in 8 seconds, this fight's happening. That's a really good way to sync everybody up as your team. You don't need to do it. It's not mandatory. It's a nice way to tell everybody what to do, though. So, the boss is now facing me. If you look behind the boss, there's this little gap in its back area. That is its rear position. By the way, I'm getting hit with the tank buster, so pop my mitigation, and so on. Because the boss isn't moving right now, Sweaty is able to move left and right as needed to do damage. Sorry, I don't remember this fight entirely, so if I forget some things away. Now, watch this. If I do this, see how this boss is spinning? And he's trying to face me the whole time? Now, Sweaty doesn't know where to stand to do his extra damage. That's a very, very important thing to do for tanks in general. Be consistent. By standing right here, the boss isn't moving. If I start doing this, well, the boss isn't going to attack right now. If I start doing this, the boss spins, and then it's just chaos. It's way too hard for him to focus that. Now, don't fret too hard over it. There is an advantage to letting the melees do their positionals, but really, in the grand scheme of things, they're only going to be gaining roughly, let's say 2 to 3% of their total DPS from positionals. If the DPS doesn't do that, it's not the end of the world. They're not going to die. Like, everything's going to be okay. Don't sweat about it too much. But if you do it the way I'm showing you like that, you're going to make a lot of people's jobs a lot easier. And one other thing is, not that Sweaty Banana is this, but a lot of DPSs are finicky. They tend to get a little bit upset easily. So if you start spinning the boss a whole bunch like this, you might see a chat come through in the chat window saying, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?"
My positionals
Yeah. Don't overthink it, but at the same time, you do want to help your team. You don't want to be a hindrance to your team. You want to help them out. So, that's the basics of positionals. There's a couple other things to go over on that, but this boss is about to die, so it's really not relevant. Also, tanks, you can eat damage. Oh, people... Oh, there you go. I just got hit with 2 mechanics. Nothing. It really doesn't do anything to you. Don't ever panic as the tank. Focus on staying in front of the boss and doing your job, basically. Also, if you get rescued like that, so be it. So, this next one right here, I'm going to show you an example of how to stop a pull if you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, like if you're like, oh shit, something's happening. So what I'm going to do right here is, Keek just got a phone call, and he didn't tell anybody, but he's now got a phone call. Keek's going to stay behind for about 15 seconds here. So I'm running through the dungeon, I'm thinking everything's good, I'm not really paying attention, blah, 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 blah. I turn and look, and I'm like, oh shit, my healer's not with us anymore. So I then have a decision to make. Do I wait for him, or do I kind of go a little bit deeper? What you can do is you can just stop, do your own little protection like this, and kind of look and see where everybody is. If you notice right here, without a healer, you're still perfectly fine. I'm not going to die. Like, there's no danger or anything like that. And hey, my healer's back. Now I can resume the pull and keep fighting. You can do that. Like, there's no rule that says you have to pull every single thing all the time. Like, just go your own pace, be as comfortable as possible, and just get through the dungeon. Don't overthink it. Don't panic. Don't think like, oh no, I'm not doing as fast as this one tank that I saw one time do it. It does not matter. The rest of this party is not going anywhere without you. Just have fun. Be calm. Be comfortable. That's the best advice I can give you. Because if you start to overthink things, that's when you start to make mistakes. One other thing I'll mention as far as dungeon pulling, sprint. I personally don't like sprinting as a tank. There's a couple reasons why, but specifically I'll show you right here. If I pop sprint right now, well, Keek is too good, so he's already keeping up with me. But let's say Keek was Sweet, and Sweet was a little bit farther back because she was loading into the area first. If I start pulling as fast as possible because I sprinted, and I get all the way up here, what's going to happen is I've now outran my healer. And by outrunning my healer, it may take him longer to get here and actually keep me safe. He can pull back like that too. But then the boss pulls me in. So the reason that's a problem is because healers have to have line of sight of you. They also have to be able to use their full skill set. He's playing White Mage, so it's not quite as relevant, but for characters like Astrologian, sorry, I'm like half paying attention right now. I didn't even use mitigation. For characters like Astrologian, they have a skill that they're going to drop on the ground where you pull, and it's going to detonate about 10 seconds later. If you don't give them time to set up that skill, it makes their job a lot harder, and it makes their damage a lot lower. The entire reason that supports are called supports is because you're there to support your teammates. The tank is not the only person in the dungeon. The healer is not the only person in the dungeon. You have to work together and communicate, essentially. Here, I'm going to show you something that's a little bit different here. I'm going to show you how to help your teammates out. Specifically with Warrior, you have an ability called Nascent Flash. All of the tanks have their own ability to support a teammate, but Nascent Flash is the Warrior one. If you look up here, I've got 3 little pretty green buttons. This is a personal choice for me. You could do it like this. I could select Keek and throw the button like this, and it tosses him a shield, and I can heal him for the next 10 seconds, essentially. But I do these little macros right here. I did them as macros to target the second person in my party, which would be the healer, the third person in my party, and the fourth person in my party. The reason for this is because, the reason I did 4 up through 4 is because in a light party, that's everybody. You don't need to cover anybody else. In a full party, that is your co-tank and both healers. Those are really the only people you're ever going to be supporting like that. Other people you could click on them manually and do your support abilities. But I do it like this because, oh shit, my healer's dying. Bam. Now he's not. So that's something that I recommend getting familiar with because it'll do a lot of really cool things, as I'm going to show you during this. I'm going to throw up a 5-second countdown and then start the pull. So this time I'm going to do my rotation a little bit more. Also, this fight, I love the scenery of this fight. It's like one of the best looking sceneries in all the dungeons. So the first attack it's using there was a raid wide. If you look at Sweaty Banana's health or Nick Sweet's health, I should have told Keith to wait actually. Next raid wide, just wait.
Okay.
You're doing too good. So this we can. Or I'll tell you what, Sweaty, go stand in that AoE. There you go. So, oh shit, he's in an AoE. Throw my heal on him, and now every damage I do heals him. If the healer's busy, that is a perfect way for a tank to pick up the slack. Like, let's say somebody was dead and Keek was reviving them. I can throw that ability on him and help him. Now, let's say I'm standing here and I'm not paying attention. I'm about to get hit. I now have a Vuln stack. Vuln stacks you've seen before, but for tanks, those are kind of like a currency of sorts. You can collect a lot of them, but if you get anywhere above 3, you should really be a lot more careful because you're going to get hurt. Like I just did right there. Like, you start to get hurt pretty bad. This time, I'm going to show you what it's called a party-wide mitigation. For a tank, it's called Shake It Off, or for warrior, it's called Shake It Off. For other classes, it's something very different. I actually forget what this mechanic is, so we just catch the dude. So by pushing this, it gives the entire party a shield and regen. I push that before that mechanic hits so that Sweaty takes less damage, I take less damage, everything takes less damage. That makes your healer's job a lot easier. It is not the healer's responsibility to heal everybody. It is your responsibility to stay healthy, and it is everybody else's responsibility. Now, if you look here, Sweet's in danger. I'm going to top my thing on her. And even though she got out of it, or she almost got out of it, we'll see. Sweet run. There you go. Even though she got out of it, the potential for protecting her was there. You want to look at your teammates. You want to help out at all times. So right here, I know this is a safe spot, but if I see somebody out of position, or like right here, if somebody was like standing in the middle, then I'm like, oh shit, let me throw this on, well, I toss it on Sweet. Like, you have options. You have a lot of control over the battlefield as a tank. And also while I'm doing this, I'm pushing my buttons. Don't get to a point where you're like, oh, I don't have to push any of my damage buttons. No, keep pushing buttons, keep doing damage, because the longer this fight goes on, the harder it is for everybody to stay alive. How was that? So, really, I think that's kind of the majority of it. This one is a big pull, so we'll do this one big pull to show you what a big pull looks like again. And then we're just going to probably skip this last boss, because we don't really need to do a whole other boss fight. So, things to remember. Is my party all here? They are. Then I'm safe. We can go. I threw my tomahawk to hit the mob, bring the mob to me, and then I use my AoE to hit them again. By doing that, I have not had to stop running once. I keep moving, I keep moving, I keep moving. You can watch their health bars over here to see if you've lost aggro, but as of right now, we're good. I'm going to throw my tomahawk. I'm going to hit every enemy, and I'm going to keep moving. And now we've got a lot of things chasing me, so this is going to hurt when we stop. In fact, you can kind of see how much damage I'm taking. Thank God Keek's healing me as we run. Now, as a DPS, this is also important stuff to know, because if you know your tank's pulling wall to wall like I am, I just lost 2 aggro, but that's fine. So priority is stability. Even though I lost the aggro, I'm not going to run into all that AoE. I'm going to stand here and trust that I'm going to recover. Pop that. Make sure you don't stand in AoEs. I'm going to use my self-healing, and I'm going to use Rampart and Arm's Length. What I'm doing is I'm buying time for my self-heal to come back. And now it's back, and now I'm safe for 6 seconds. If you're in a party with somebody you trust, like Keek, if I tell him, oh hey, I'm good, he knows that he can just keep doing damage right now. He doesn't need to heal me for these 6 seconds. Or if I say, hey, don't worry about me, I'm popping home gang, then he knows, hey, I don't have to actually pay attention right now. Like, I can just focus on doing damage and that kind of stuff. A lot of enemies on screen, but it's very, very simple. As long as you maintain your health, you can pull a ton of enemies. There's really no need to worry about that. Also, because Keek's keeping me safe. So yeah, that's basically pulling dungeons. This is one of the more egregious dungeons in terms of how many enemies you can pull at once, but all of them in some way, shape, or form are the same. The only thing I wanted to bring up here before I forget is enemies like this. They don't have positionals, so it does not matter if you're standing in front or behind or anything like that. But do you familiarize yourself with what the maximum melee range is? If you see I'm standing right here, I can hit the boss from right here, but I'm not technically in the boss's hitbox. That's just an important concept to know in general, like how far you have to be to hit something. Not too important. Yeah, so the last thing's the boss. We're not going to do that, though. We can leave out of the dungeon right here, but that is tanking in a dungeon. A lot of information. Does anybody have any questions on any of that? Excuse me. Or if anything wasn't clear, please feel free to ask. Okay. Well, if you have questions later, you can always ask it. Next thing, I'm going to ask Keek and Sweaty to tell a little bit about what they look for as DPS and healers, what they look for in a tank, so you hear another voice, especially because both of them are very skilled at this game. So, for example, Keek, as a healer in both dungeons and in raids, what do you see tanks do wrong, and what do you personally get upset by when a tank does it?
Not mitting is the big one, because then you're just putting a ton of work on your healer for no reason.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the main one. Keeping aggro is another common thing. So it used to be if the tank lost aggro, all enemies would just go to the healer and kill them.
Yes.
Now it's usually whoever's the top DPS.
So it's so you get to
try
live.
to keep aggro.
So when he says that too, when we talk about keeping aggro, basically if you don't hit an enemy for a while, that enemy will start to lose aggression on you and will go to whoever's hitting it more.
Yes.
That's relevant in mobs if you're not paying attention to certain things. Like that first pull we did, I didn't notice that one enemy was hitting Sweet the entire time, and that one enemy dropped her down to like 40% health. Just one enemy. So if there had been two enemies, like if I had missed a whole wave or something like that, then what would have happened is she probably would have died and we wouldn't have noticed, or if Keek wasn't paying attention, he wouldn't have noticed, and then all of a sudden we lose a good 25% of our damage because there's not a DPS anymore. So yeah, re-aggroing, like make sure you tag monsters. Tagging meaning like you hit them. You tag them with your attack, something like that. Mitigation, like he's saying, if you're getting hit with a tank buster, use your mitigation. Don't just eat it and let the healer heal you. You can do that, but the healer has a finite amount of resources, and chances are they're saving their big heals for something much more important. Don't make them heal you to fool. Make sure you stay healthy. Everybody is responsible for their own health in a dungeon and in a fight. The healer obviously has a job to do, but you are responsible for your own health. Make sure you're staying healthy. Was there anything else, Keek, that you...
Not so much a healer thing, but try not to single pull dungeons.
Yes.
Always try to double pull, especially level like 30-ish and beyond when people start getting AoEs.
Yes, absolutely.
Because if you're single pulling the entire dungeon, then you're not necessary, because a healer and 2 DPS can do that.
Exactly. So single pull means mobs come in groups of 3 or 4 or whatever. Don't just pull one group of mobs. If you're very, very fresh, like if it's your first couple times doing a dungeon, don't be ashamed of doing that. But like he's saying, if you're past level 30 and you've been playing for a little while, go ahead and step up. Test yourself a little bit. The worst that happens is you die. Like,
It's very okay to do it early on, but later levels, yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, and like Stasha, it's fine because no one has an AoE but you.
As a tank, you pretty much determine the path of the entire party, so try not to waste their time,
Yep.
as well as your own.
So that's something that a lot of people have mentioned to me too in general, anxiety about tanking and people getting mad at you in Party Finder or in dungeons or anything like that.
Tanxiety, if you will.
Yeah, tanxiety. I'm here to tell you, within reason. Within reason. You don't want to be a jerk, but within reason, do not worry about what other people think about you. If you think that somebody's going to yell at you for something, that's their business. Like, you can't control other people's emotions, but what you can control, like Kik and Sweaty were mentioning, you can control how much you do as your own personal tanking. So at least pull two mobs, see how it feels, get comfortable with it. Once you learn how to pull 2 mobs, then you can start pulling more and go from there and go from there. If you die, it's not the end of the world. If you feel what I do, if I die, I just quickly go into the chat and say, that's my bad. I wasn't paying attention. Even if I was paying attention and I sucked, I'm going to say that so they don't think I'm an idiot. But don't overthink it. Like, it's okay to make mistakes. It is okay to make mistakes. If you do make a mistake, scale back a little bit. If I had done that big pull and we had died, then the next time we respawn, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to pull quite as many this time. I'm going to do like maybe 1 less mob. Make sure that we're all on the same page before I try that again. Yeah, don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to try. But if you do make a mistake, just learn from it. That's the best advice I can give you on that.
Also, as soon as you get into a dungeon, you can just say that you're kind of new.
Yes.
Like, say you're new to tanking or new to the dungeon or whatever. 95% of the time, everyone's just going to be cool with it.
Absolutely. If you say that, like, hey, this is my first time tanking this, or this is my first time tanking blah, 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 everybody will know to keep an eye on you in that case. There is no shame in being new at this game. Like, no shame.
Same applies if you're new to healer or new to like any other job. Just mention it beforehand.
Yep. Don't be afraid to talk to people. Pay attention and still miss mechs. I don't know how y'all remember them all. So a lot of it's repetition. So Sweet said,
it starts to fuck with you. You can report the fuck out of somebody for harassment, because I've done that a few times when the healer's just like rescuing me into packs that I did not want to feel like doing at the time.
Absolutely.
I was new and I was like, motherfucker.
That's an aggressive healer.
Yeah.
So Sweet just mentioned I pay attention and still miss mechanics. I don't know how y'all remember them all. So that's something that I was going to address briefly here, like what markers are. The best way to see that would probably be in a fight. But in broad strokes, once you know what symbols mean, like what they mean, you can react to things a lot better. So most common ones that you'll see as a tank is tank busters. There's 2 kinds of tank busters that you're going to get. The most common one is going to be that red circle that goes around your body, and it's like, hey, don't touch this person. This person's going to get hit hard. That's a general tank buster. Most of the time, all it means is you're going to get hit by something, and it's not an AoE, but you should still treat it like an AoE because some things aren't homogenized, like the markers aren't always telling the same story. There's another form of tank buster though that looks like caution tape. That's what I call it. It's like a yellow-orange like square that goes around you. That is also a tank buster, but it's a tank buster that shoots a laser. That will hit everybody behind you, so don't do that.
Anyone who is not a tank will likely die.
I actually have a great example of that. You guys are all in my party, so I'm kidnapping you one more time. And
B12 is a great example.
I wasn't going to go quite that far, but that might be a better example because, well, whatever. Let me do unsynced. So the reason I'm going to show you this right now is because I want to show you what some of the different markers look like. I also didn't want to show you a dungeon that would be like a major spoiler for people. So this would be considered like a spoiler, but there's no cutscene, so hopefully it doesn't do it. Somebody doesn't meet the requirements. Sweet, have you not done P12? All right. I'm going to kick you from the party for just a second. Sorry about that. We got to get you to do Pandemonium. Pandemonium rules.
Especially this fight.
Yeah, it's unsynced though. So here's a couple different icons that you're going to see. So here's a good thing to know too. So on this fight, there's a mechanic that's going to come up where she does left and right wings. As the tank, be stable. Make sure you're facing the same direction, because when she does this mechanic, she's going to do it based on her positioning. So now I can move freely, and the boss is locked in this position. If I was standing right here, it would make this attack go awkward and would look like it's going to hit on different sides. Just be stable for your team. Even if you're not always facing north, don't be moving around like a lunatic. That's the best advice I can give on that. So this looks like a raid wide. I don't remember all these mechanics, I'll be honest. Oh, it's this one. I'm waiting for her to do the tank buster. I just want to show you the tank buster so you can see what it looks like. So by positioning like this, by the way, that was just something we did naturally right there, but I positioned the boss. Okay, here. So now see how she's doing at this weird angle? If I had been facing middle again, it would be more uniform for everybody. They'd have more room to move around. But when I pulled the boss that way, Sweaty was over here and I was over here, so I still had the boss positioned for positions. Like he could still do his job despite a chaotic moment, essentially. I just want to see the tank buster. How long does it take? All right, so this is the caution tape. I'm going to bring it to Sweaty, and we're going to laugh as he gets vapor in this. Oh, never mind. Kik wants it. So if you see that caution tape, do not stand with your team. That's the best thing I could say. Don't stand with your team because that'll happen. Also, if you ever lose a healer and you look at your list, you're like, hey, we don't have a healer and we don't have a res suicide pack, there's no reason to stay in that dungeon. don't hold.
Unless the boss is at like 5%.
Yeah, sure. If you're about to end the boss, go for it. So that's what the caution tape looks like. I say it like that because you don't see it in every fight, but specifically, it's an important one to know. On that note, general tanking. You always want to position the boss away from your PvP. PvP mechanics are in PvE. General rule of thumb: you do not want the boss facing the party. There's a couple key examples of that. An early one is Ifrit. The very first trial in the game has a cleave that will hit in front of it. If you position it to your teammates, they will die. Shiva has one. Shiva has a cleave that will kill people. It will absolutely one-shot anybody but the tank. So, in general, you never want the boss facing your party members. Now, that said, if you see a party member standing next to you and you know they're going to die, you can move. You can definitely move, but don't overcorrect. At the end of the day, if they get killed, it is their fault. The reason I say it like that is because you don't want to move the boss and kill everybody else making an adjustment. Stability is more important than that in general. Okay, so that's a shit ton of information. I think we're kind of nearing the end of it. I have a couple more specific things I wanted to go over, but I think at least by and large, you guys have seen all of it. Does anybody have any questions about any of this? I'm so sorry. You know what? I haven't been checking. I haven't been checking if you were typing in chat. I hope nobody was typing in chat. That'd be great if they were. All right, now cool. So if you have any questions, please ask or type.
One question.
What's up? Go ahead, Jeannie.
Do you have any hotbar setup things for controllers that you know where to go to look?
So for controllers, I don't, unfortunately, but there is a resource that I was going to show everybody. There's a Discord server called The Balance. It is pretty much the de facto, like, this is where you go to for all job information.
The sacred text, if you will.
Yeah. I will show what that looks like briefly in a second here, so that way you can familiarize yourself with it. But in very, very broad terms, that is the best place to go for that information. There is actually specifically a section in the jobs that tell you how to set up your hotbars, or recommended setups for hotbars. Now, that said, I can briefly talk about that for me personally and how I approach hotbars. I'm very, very vanilla with my hotbars. In fact, they're kind of a chaotic mess if you're not familiar with my setup. But I try to keep all of mine very, very similar, so that way if I switch jobs, I'm not panicking for any abilities. What I try to do is I try to keep my rotation, my core rotation, right here in the 1 through 4 range. I try to keep my AoE rotations right here in 5 and 6, and I try to keep my range attack in 7. There is a specific reason for that for me personally, but I try to keep it that way. I don't think of it as, oh, this is heavy swing, this is maim, this is Storm's Eye. I think of this as my 1, 2, 3. Or I think of this as my AoE 1 and 2. The reason for that is if I switch to Paladin, I still have my 1, 2, 3. I still have my AoE 1 and 2. And I still have my ranged attack. So even though you're switching jobs, you know where everything is. Another thing I like to do is... Oh, sorry, I hit the dummy. Another thing I like to do is on all of my classes, I try. Oh my god, let me change jobs. All right. All of my classes, I try to keep my gap closer up here so it's readily available for me. Gap closer is any move that repositions you, really. So if I'm standing over here and I hit onslaught, boom, I'm now hitting the boss. That's important for moves like, let's say the boss is doing a giant AoE attack that hits all the way to right here. If I'm standing here, I can't hit that boss. I could throw tomahawks, but I can't hit the boss. Now let's say the AoE detonates, bam, bam, I'm back in the fight. As opposed to if I stood right here, waited for the AoE to happen, and then run in, and then hit. It's a loss of a concept called uptime, which was something else I was about to touch on. Uptime is time spent hitting the boss. It's very important because even if I'm not doing buttons, by standing here, you see how I'm hitting the boss for 7,000, blah, 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 blah. It's 4,000 if it wasn't a crit. If I use my 1, it does 10,000. So that means every few seconds I'm hitting the boss the equivalent of 1 attack. If I'm standing here, that's not happening. So that's a loss of DPS, essentially. So when we talk about uptime, that means you want to stay hitting the boss as much as possible. So if the AoE detonates, bam, bam, I'm right back in the mix, I'm pushing my buttons, I'm doing all the damage, all that good stuff. So, gap closers. I try to leave my gap closers where I can find them at a heartbeat. Personally speaking, I try to leave this side of the bar as my burst bar. Like, this is where I do the most damage. So that way, like, let's say I'm entering what's called a burst phase, or the phase where you do the most damage in the shortest amount of time. If I know I'm about to do my burst, like for the warrior, it's when inner release is off cooldown, then I get my mouse is over here, I'm standing next to the boss, and I'm pushing a shit ton of buttons. That way I don't have to go looking around my hotbar for like buttons and finding everything, all that good stuff. For tanks, set up however you want to. It's perfectly up to you, but I try to keep all of my mitigations down here on the bottom. This is my tanking bar. I have it raid-wide mitigation, I have personal mitigation, and then I have AoE mitigation. I try to cluster them in that order. So like if I was on Paladin, I have the raid-wide still over here, I have personal mitigations right here, and I have raid or party-wide right there. If I was on Gunbreaker, well, I'm in combat now because I'm an idiot, but same concept. Try and keep your mitigations all in the same spot, because let's say you're fighting something and somebody says, hey, we need... This is more late game, so don't worry about it as an early game player. But if you're fighting a raid and we need to mitigate raid-wide damage, but I'm running around like this, like, oh shit, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm dodging attacks, like, ah, shit, shit, shit. And then I hear somebody say, raid-wide, raid-wide. Then I'm like, oh shit, well, I know it's right here. So even though I'm running around like an idiot, I still know how to push my button. That's why it's important to know where your buttons are. So when you are confused, because you will be confused constantly in fights, it happens. Every time something new happens, you're going to get confused. But if you know where buttons are, it makes it a hell of a lot easier for you. So for hotbars specifically, I would check out the balance. But for your personal learning how to play the game, just kind of conceptualize your moves as what they do. These are my rotations. These are my bursts. These are my protect. And these are my other. Like, this is, Nasa Flash. I talked about that before. So, does that kind of answer your question on that, Uni, or do you have any other questions related to that?
Yes, that's good. I understand.
Okay, cool. Did anybody else have any other questions? I see Maz type something. Okay. So, I think that's the bulk of everything there was to show you. I will give you the Discord stuff. I'm going to post it here in the thing. I don't really have a way to quickly show the Discord server while I'm recording this, so I'll stop the recording before I do that. But there was one last thing I was going to show you real quick, is I wanted to show you what a rotation looks like when you're pushing all of your buttons in a very specific window, and what that means for like keeping an eye on your surroundings and stuff like that. So for the warrior, I can speak on warrior. That's one I know very well. With a warrior, when you start a pull, you're going to be standing here. You're going to do a countdown, blah, 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 blah. I forgot my countdown button. You're going to do a countdown of like 8 seconds. Cool. Oh, real quick. So as a tank, you have the option to do countdowns. Here's how I approach raids, especially if it's like a group of people. Not everybody waits. If somebody pulls the boss, just start fighting. Don't worry about it. It's not worth getting stressed over. But as the tank, what I do is I go to party, ready check. It throws up a ready check for your entire party. The moment everybody checks yes, or Kik said no, but you know what? We don't care about our healer. We're going anyways. when the thing's done, you can immediately throw up a countdown. That's how you get everybody on the same page. So for Warrior, your opener is you throw a Tomahawk and you build your meter immediately. And then you do 1, 2, 3. The reason for this is you've got to get that 10% buff I mentioned before. And now we do whatever the hell we want. We're in what's called our burst window. We're going to start pushing all of our buttons here. I've used all 3 of my onslaught charges because that gives me one more, a little bit extra damage. I pop that, pop this. And then now, if I had used the pot, the potion, I would be just on the back end of that window. I would do my 1, 2, 4. And now I got 50 gauge. I pop Fell Cleave, pop Infuriate, and pop Inner Chaos. And look what just came off cooldown, Upheaval. Every one of those skills lined up in that window. I was able to use every single damaging skill, and because I started with this, it became available when I was done with everything else. If I had waited at all, then that's something called drift. Drift is a pretty simple term meaning that you've drifted your cooldowns so that they don't line up perfectly anymore. The very first time you do a fight, you do all those skills in order, everything will be coming off cooldown at the same time. You see how these moves all came off cooldown at the same time again? If I had not done that, or if I had done like this, and then I was like doing all my buttons, or I'm distracted, I'm not really paying attention, like la 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 la. Oh shit, I didn't hit this button. So now this is on 30-second cooldown, this is on 49-second cooldown. I have now damaged my rotation. That is very, very like high level. Do not stress it too much as you're learning, but be aware of the concept that if you don't do your rotations as these moves, these are called oGCDs, as your certain oGCDs come off of cooldown, they need to be used. Because if you don't use them, you're delaying another use. If a fight takes 5 seconds and this ability takes 30 seconds to, if a fight takes 5 minutes and this ability takes 30 seconds to use, that means I'm only going to get to use this ability 10 times during the fight. If I lose even one of those uses, there's a chance I'll miss one of those like activations, and it may not seem like the biggest deal in the grand scheme of things, but that's the difference between doing a ton of damage and just getting through content. Start considering your moves as time-based, as a resource. Like right here, I haven't pushed into release in a while. If this was a 5-minute fight, I'm going to get a tremendous loss to my DPS because I didn't use my strongest ability off of cooldown. It's called using an ability off of cooldown when you have a what I just described. So yeah, that was basically it for that. So what I'm going to do then, well, real quick, does anybody have any last questions? Because I'm going to kill the recording part and then I'm going to show you what the Discord looks like, the balance, so you know what to look for.
So the thing about drift, why it's so bad in high-end raid,
Please do.
is that there's not really a way to fix it.
Nope.
Unless you happen to be in a raid where the boss just stands around doing nothing and you can't hit him. If you can target them the entire time, you cannot fix your drift.
Yeah.
Like once you drift, you're just drifted for the rest of the fight.
Yep. And what that means, big picture, is at high level content, you have burst windows where like other characters will use a buff for the party. And if you don't have your abilities available under that window, you're going to do significantly less damage than if you had done it under that window. It sounds like a really very specific thing because it is. It is very specific, but it is the difference between, let's just use a baseline number. It's the difference between doing 18,000 damage to the boss versus 15,000 damage. That may not seem like a lot, but it is. It's 20% of your damage. So drift is a big concept to learn. Don't fuck everything up. Like if you mess up, it's not the end of the world. Keep fighting, keep doing your job, but try to stay conscious of it. Don't drop combos, don't do that kind of stuff. You will drop combos though. Like every time I do a fight, I eventually drop a combo or something like that. So yeah, that's kind of how that works.
If you play Gunbreaker, you're gonna have a great time because that's just
yeah. Each class is very different too. All right, so Kikyo Sweaty, anything else to add on y'all's perspectives?
I don't think so. I dropped a link to the balance in the
Awesome.
VC chat.
Awesome.
Thank you.
One thing that wasn't mentioned was the positionals. So let's say the tank is doing some spinny shit like we were doing earlier. You have the option of true north on melees, which you ignore all positional requirements for 10 seconds and you get 2 charges of it. So, yeah, if that were to happen, you just true north, ignore all positionals until it comes off cooldown,
Or just go play ranged.
or just play a range. Like,
That's true.
don't worry about positionals at all.
Who wants to play melee, anyways? All right. So it looks like we kind of touched a lot on everything there. I know there's a lot of information, but hopefully a lot of it makes sense now that you've seen it. If you have any specific questions, please feel free to ask any of us. Like, you can definitely either ask us in chat or just DM or whatever. Like, personally, I'm okay with DM, so just message me anytime. But yeah, that's a lot of information, but hopefully it makes a lot of sense, and at the very least, it'll at least help you focus on things differently. The 2 main things I would like to hopefully impart upon you is look at your team, help your team, like be aware of your team. The best thing you can learn is how to be aware of the entire battlefield. Even if you're not actively helping them, it'll make you better at the game if you know what's going on around you. And then just in general, don't be scared. As tank, you have so much leeway to do a lot of things. People say all the time, like, did you not learn these fights? I'm like, no, because I got hit by 4 mechanics and still lived. I'm a tank. Like, you don't have to learn the fights if you're a tank. So just don't be scared of making mistakes. Have fun with it.
I got one real quick, actually, though.
What's up?
Video. Let me see. Where's a good one to post videos for this specifically, do you think?
The event PC.
Yeah, you can post
Yeah.
that. All right. Well, I'm going to kill the recording real quick, and then I'll go over that. I'll share my screen with the Discord one. So give me 1 second here.